welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical astrology insights. And I focus on both natal and relationship astrology. And if you like this content and you would like to see more of these kinds of videos from me, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. You can check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you. And also, I have a tarot channel. If you're interested in tarot, you might want to check it out. I'm going to link it in the video description, also in the pinned comment. You can check it out, maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. And also, I do tarot readings. And if you're interested in tarot readings, you can email me and I will send you a pricing list and also some sample readings and feedback that I have gotten so far. Thank you. Okay, so today's video is on Saturn and how Saturn influences a person's life's work. And I'm going to start, I have written some notes to keep me from, getting too sidetracked because I have that tendency. So I'm going to start straight into it with what are some of the natural significations connected to the planet of Saturn. So Saturn stands for, first of all, it is the natural karaka or signifier of the D10 chart in the 10th house, because Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn and it's also the co-ruler of Aquarius together with Rahu. But mainly it is the planet of Capricorn, the sign that it rules completely, and the house that is associated with Capricorn is the 10th house, which is the house of social karma and career. And a breakdown of your social karma and career at let's say under a magnifying glass can also be seen by analyzing the D10 chart or the Dasamsha chart, which shows you even more in depth what your social karma is, what your career path is going to be, everything to do with your career and your social status, okay? However, I'm mainly going to be referring here to Saturn's position in the natal chart. I'm going to be looking at Saturn from the perspective of the Ascendant, so where is Saturn sitting in your natal chart with respect to house placement, sign placement, nakshatra, aspect that it gives, aspect that it receives, everything that touches Saturn in your horoscope. But I'm also going to be looking at it from the perspective of Chandra Lagna, and I'm going to get more into that towards the end, okay? Chandra Lagna being the moon as ascendant. Basically, Chandra is moon and Lagna is ascendant, or the equivalent word for that in Vedic astrology. It's not exactly the same as the ascendant, but I won't get into that, okay? So yes, also Saturn governs time, it governs death, longevity, things that affect your health, everything that has to do with time and longevity, things that take a long time to develop, a long time to progress. It also rules hard work, obstacles, delays, frustrations, repetitive activities. It rules the justice system, it rules social trends, social pressures, reality and the limitations of reality, or rather material resources as well. So Saturn also is connected to the oil industry, oil, anything that is a material and finite source of energy, but also more recently, it can also link to renewable forms of energy, sources of energy. Saturn is also work that is seen as generally unglamorous, like hard manual labor, physical work in general, repetitive tasks, like I said, also can be connected to night shifts. So any kind of work that basically is associated with, let's say, lower classes, quote unquote, or underprivileged individuals. Actually, I have talked about this, that Saturn is also the planet that in Vedic astrology is connected to beggars. So people who have to beg for things, people that are at the mercy of other people's, opinions and stuff like that. And so it's also, from that perspective, one of the two planets that is most connected to politics. The other one being the sun. And I also kind of touched upon this in some other videos that I did, like the one I did on the Age of Aquarius, I'm pretty sure, that in my view, Saturn rules over democracy, and it also rules over left-leaning political ideologies, whereas the sun is more about monarchies and right-leaning political ideologies. But I won't get into expanding those topics right now. I do suggest that you watch the video I made on the Age of Aquarius. I'm probably going to link it in case you want to hear more about that. And also, basically, Saturn, because it's connected to democracy, so in most places where you have a democracy, but unfortunately, Saturn in its more extreme form is also connected to totalitarian states, which is one of the reasons why democracies, I think, are more popular now. That's why I also talked about it in the video I did on Age of Aquarius, because Aquarius is co-ruled by Saturn. So, and Saturn and Sun are arch enemies. And what do you see? The main conflicts now politically are happening between, right-wingers and left-wingers and monarchies and people who are pro-monarchies, people who are anti-monarchies and stuff like that. But the dark side of Saturn is also totalitarian states, people who basically use democracy as an excuse to restrict people's freedom extremely. Okay, but again, I don't want to get too much into that. Also, it rules the state, so it rules the courts of law, whatever the legislative system is imposed by the state. And I mentioned this especially in democratic societies. Karma in general, so if you have karma as in, it can be, of course, things that you are owed, but it can also be things that you have to do or pay off in this lifetime. So, let me see. I'm checking my notes here so that I don't get sidetracked. So, Saturn in the natal chart, in general, yes, it shows an area where you will face frustrations and obstacles time and time again. So, you will be constantly tested in these areas. You will only achieve things through hard work and perseverance. So whatever area Saturn is placed in your horoscope, these are areas where you will have to really work your butt off. Saturn does not allow any luck, to come in, at least unless you also have some Jupiter, especially a strongly placed Jupiter aspecting these areas. Most likely it's going to be areas that cause a lot of frustrations, a lot of obstacles. And it's kind of like because they're so difficult, right? So like, it's kind of like from the beginning testing your curiosity, because it's like, let me give you an example. So like, let's say you have Saturn in the 11th house, right? This probably means that from a young age, you see that you are not good at making friends, or maybe you have bad relationships with your elder siblings, or maybe you see that it's not easy for you to gain from your career, because the 11th house shows gains as in material gains from your career. But you look around and you see other people maybe find this natural, right? For them, it's coming easily. So it intrigues you, right? So it's like, you're going to be thinking, why is it that other people can easily make friends, but I can't? So that's going to make you, it's going to plant this inception, idea in your brain that it's going to make you think like, why can't I have that? It's going to make you work towards that. Of course, this largely depends on what else is happening or surrounding Saturn, because if you also have, let's say, Rahu with Saturn, it's definitely going to show that this is an area you are going to have to work through throughout your life. You're going to work towards this area of your life because Rahu brings material desire. So it will show a very strong desire in that particular area, right? So again, if you have that in the 11th house, it can show a strong desire to be popular, to have a lot of friends, to connect with large audiences, stuff like that, right? If on the other end of the spectrum, if you have it with Ketu, it could show the opposite of that. It can actually show some level of disinterest towards Saturn things, But again, this is depending on really infinite different combinations of configurations you could have in a natal chart. Okay, just to give you some idea. But basically, it is going to show areas where you are being tested time and time again. Okay, let's say, again, you want to have people, for instance, who have Saturn in the seventh house, right? They could really want to get married, but for some reason or another, they keep coming across obstacles. Maybe they have a long-term relationship and this person breaks up with them suddenly and without warning for no explanation, etc. Right? So it's kind of like, it's going to be something they're going to have to work towards. And once they do get married, right, they might come across all kinds of obstacles. They might be tested time and time again. This marriage will test their fortitude, their determination, their commitment. Saturn is all about commitment, right? It's all about testing how much are you willing to sacrifice, how much are you willing to invest and work to achieve your results, you know? Nothing that, Saturn touches is going to come easily to you, to various degrees, of course, depending on, is it a conjunction, because a conjunction is the strongest aspect, but then is it also the third aspect? The third aspect of Saturn shows an area that usually you are consciously working towards in this life, but I'm going to get more into that with the examples. So, furthermore, let me see. Yeah, so Saturn is all about you becoming thorough, and it will put pressure on you. It's kind of like, how they say about diamonds, for instance. It takes a lot of time and pressure for a diamond or other crystals to form, which incidentally is also a Saturn field. Saturn is all about what is growing in the earth or what is developing in the earth, like minerals, stones, geology, all that stuff. Speology as well is all about Saturn. So the idea being that, the more obstacles, the more frustrations you have to face in reaching a particular result or a goal, the better the final result is going to be, because Saturn is going to force you to check every little detail, right? So like, imagine if you're trying to, I don't know, let me give an example, like, let's say you're trying to knit a sweater, like just a silly example, right? And you are really lucky in the sense that you just get it right, okay? Maybe without even thinking, you just instinctively get it right. And you might, have successfully created a sweater, but when something more difficult is going to come along, a more difficult task, maybe a more complicated pattern you have to knit, you will not be that prepared. You may not be able to reproduce the same result because you've only achieved it out of luck, out of instinct and intuition, or because you didn't come across any problems, right? Whereas a person who has some, let's say Saturn influence upon their ability to knit a sweater is going to be like, maybe all kinds of things are going to go wrong, like they're suddenly going to realize that the fabric they bought is breaking, or the knitting needles are bent, or they're breaking, or something. So it's going to force, or like, I don't know, let's say they made some kind of a mistake in the pattern and now they have to go back and redo the whole thing maybe halfway through, right? So someone who comes across all of these obstacles is going to be that much more knowledgeable on knitting than a person who just gets it right the first time, right? Maybe the first person has had the luck of just buying the first pair of knitting needles online without doing any research, and they turn out to be the right ones. But the person who has had like maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 pairs of knitting needles now will know a lot more about knitting needles, right? They'll be like, oh, well, I know where to go to buy the best ones. They have to be, this pattern. They have to be this brand. They have to have this composition. Same thing with the fabric they're using, right? So they're going to be way more knowledgeable and way more thorough. And similarly, actually, this gets me to the idea of, what Thomas Edison was said to say when he invented the light bulb. He said something along the lines of, I haven't failed. He actually invented the light bulb after 10,000 tries or something like that. And he said, I haven't failed. I just found 10,000 ways that didn't work. And that's exactly what Saturn does. That is exactly a Saturnian sort of energy, right? Where you just keep trying and trying and trying. And the final product is going to be thorough. And also, most importantly, what Saturn wants you to do is to create a service or a product that will stand the test of time, something that is durable, that is, strong and dependable. This is also, by the way, Saturn rules rocks and the bone, right? The skeleton in living beings, right? So the skeleton is the foundation, the thing that everything else is built on. So if you don't have like a strong skeleton, it doesn't really matter, how healthy you are, because you're not going to be a healthy individual or a strong individual. And it's the same thing, right? So Saturn will rule things like, I don't know, the Colosseum or Roman roads that are still standing strong after 2,000 years, right? Stuff like that. So in any case, with respect to this issue of like Saturn showing the person's life's work, and why do I say this? This is something mostly that I mean, it is also based in the general theory of what Saturn stands for in Vedic astrology, but it is also something that I mainly observed through, empirical knowledge. Like by reading a lot of charts over the years, I realized that Saturn really shows areas that this person eventually really gets successful at. And it shows areas that one way or another, this person keeps like hitting, it's like they keep hitting their head against the wall in these areas. Of course, it depends again on how motivated the person is to go. But usually Saturn shows motivation, because Saturn is going to show you like, hey, this is something you're not good at. And it's that level of insecurity that is going to keep you fixated upon, the Saturn area of life. And it's going to make you, like, you're going to keep thinking, like, okay, but maybe I should work harder at this. Or, like, maybe, it's going to be an area of friction and insecurity. And you're going to keep, like, being thrown into that direction one way or another. And for some people, in many cases, as you're going to see with the examples, the Saturn situation can show what they are best known for. In fact, I would say, looking at other people's charts, I would say the majority of charts that I've seen, Saturn shows something, at least, some connection to what this person does for a living, or even if it's not something that they exactly do for a living, it's somehow connected to their reputation, what they become known for. And this is because these are usually areas that this person has really, really worked on over long periods of time. And so they get really good at these particular issues. And yeah, I'm going to show you more about this when I get to the examples. But also, I wanted to get here a little bit about talking about Lagna versus Chandra Lagna. So I have heard a theory, and this is also why I mentioned this in the videos I did last year about the transits for 2022, which, by the way, I'm going to start the series for those also, hopefully this week or the next, with the first video. Yeah, but I mentioned when I did last year's series that you can also use the moon sign, not just the ascendant sign, to read the interpretations for transits. Let's say transits for Aries 2022. And this is because the theory that I have read is, well, that you can read the natal chart from the perspective of the moon. So just taking the moon sign as the ascendant, you will see a different perspective of this person's life. And what I have read, according to theory, is that it's especially true for people who have their moon sign in a lower degree than the ascendant sign. So let's say if your moon sign is in 0 degrees Aries and your ascendant sign is in 20 degrees Pisces, it shows that that means that your moon is in a lower degree. So it's irrespective of sign. You don't look at the sign, you just look at the degree. So the maximum degree that a planet could be in is, I think, 29 degrees and 59 minutes, I think. So if you have a planet that is in 29 degrees, that planet, or that point, in this case the ascendant, is higher than any planet below 29 degrees. But what I have noticed is that in many times it's actually useful to look at the moon or the Chandra Lagna, so the moon as the ascendant, irrespective of whether it's in a lower degree or not compared to the ascendant. It will show a different kind of perspective, and in fact, in many ways, it can show a more personal perspective on this person's life's path, in the sense that the moon represents your ability to be happy, or what you go for in order to be happy. So from the Chandra Lagna, Saturn can actually even more strongly sometimes show areas where this person really feels they need to work on this area in order to be fulfilled, right, on a spiritual level. But what I have seen is that it seems like when the moon is in a lower degree, it's often an indicator that this person is going to become well known for what their Saturn situation is. And I mean their Saturn situation by comparison to the moon in their horoscope. And I'm only talking about the natal chart here. So I'm talking about the natal, the D1 chart. The Chandra Lagna, like the name suggests, is just taking the moon as the ascendant. So as if the moon is in the ascendant, and you look at where the rest of the planets are placed compared to the moon. Okay, so if you have, let's say, moon in Taurus, Taurus now becomes the ascendant. So if you have a planet in Gemini, that planet is sitting in the second house from the moon, or the second house from the Chandra Lagna. Okay, and when it comes to what should you look at for the Saturn, as usual, so you should look at the sign, you should look to some extent at the ruler of the, and not just the sign, but I would say especially the nakshatra, right? The nakshatras, as usual, I would say, give deeper insights into what this person is going to be focused on. So look at the nakshatra lord, how is the nakshatra lord placed as well. But most importantly, you want to look at Saturn, Saturn's position by nakshatra, position by sign, by house, by aspect. What planets is it aspecting? What houses is it aspecting? What planets are aspecting Saturn, and what houses do these planets rule? Okay, those are going to show areas of life. And as I mentioned initially, for instance, the third house from Saturn is going to show, so both the house where Saturn is sitting and the third house from Saturn are generally going to show areas that this person is going to become well known for, because the third from Saturn shows where you're going to put a lot of your conscious efforts into. And what other planets are sitting there, of course, are also going to influence the general outcome. Okay, so this is the main thing that I wanted to say, and now I'm going to get to the examples. So first of all, I have Margaret Thatcher. So she's a really interesting example here. If you look at her horoscope, the moon is in a lower sign, in a lower degree, than her ascendant. But both of the moon and the ascendant actually paint a relevant influence in her situation. So first of all, from the ascendant, she has Saturn in the ascendant. And Saturn is in Vishaka Nakshatra. Already, Vishaka Nakshatra in Libra is a nakshatra that is very known for politics. I mean, not very known, but one of the fields that is most connected to Vishaka is politics, or any kind of profession where, the person has to connect to other people, has to teach, has to be like, by the way, that's another thing. She had a training as a lawyer, okay? And Vishaka is ruled by Jupiter. And then you also have, she has Jupiter, the ruler of Vishaka, is sitting in Sagittarius. So it's a very strong Jupiter. And Sagittarius is also the sign that is most connected to the legal profession. Initially, she actually had a training in chemistry, and then after she actually already had kids and everything was settled down, she decided to go for a career in as a lawyer, to go for a training as a lawyer, and eventually got into politics. Let me check something. Yeah, plus Jupiter is in Purva Ashadha, which is also called the invincible one. Okay, so Purva Ashadhas, first of all, are known to be really competitive both Vishaka and Purva actually are very competitive. I would say more Vishaka than Purva. But Purva also is a very ambitious, very optimistic, wants to be first, wants to win, and is also known to be connected to conflicts, even love of conflicts. I also mentioned this again in other videos that Hitler had 3 planets in Purva. And in the sense that it's connected to some extent to politics, to dealing with ideologies, and it's also a very kind of not particularly tolerant sort of energy, and she was known as a person who was very firm and very kind of strong. She was also nicknamed the Iron Lady. And the 3rd house is the house of willpower. So this is interesting to remember, because from both her moon and her ascendant, you can see this 3rd house being particularly strong. So first of all, from where Saturn is sitting, it aspects Jupiter by 3rd aspect. And also, the 3rd aspect of Saturn shows the area that you're going to put most of your efforts in. So the 3rd house shows communication, willpower, and also, since Saturn is aspecting Jupiter, Jupiter also is a signifier of the legal profession. So already that kind of like shows her general trajectory. But it goes on even more in depth than this. If you look at it from the Chandra Lagna, or the moon placement, so she has moon in Leo in Magha, I think. And also in Leo, I don't think, not left-leaning ideologies, what can I say? But I won't get into that now. Okay, so she has moon in Leo, and she has Saturn in the 3rd house from the moon. The 3rd house, by the way, happens to be one of the best house placements for Saturn to be in, because any malefic in a Dustana house, basically a house that is equivalent to the mutable signs, it's a positive placement, because these are called difficult houses. So difficult planets do well in these houses because they like challenges. So Saturn in the 3rd house is the house of communication, and it's also the house of willpower. And on top of that, it's conjunct Mercury, which is, I think, also in Vishaka. Let me check. No, it's not in Vishaka. It's in Swati. But that's not really relevant. Okay, so she has the conjunction. First of all, she has a very tight conjunction between her ascendant and Saturn. And then she has Saturn conjunct Mercury. And if you look at her horoscope, right, this is what I was going to say. Saturn is in the 3rd house from the moon, and she was dubbed the Iron Lady. So she was known for her willpower and her determination, especially having in view the fact that she was already married and already, had a pretty established position, but she continued to pursue her ambitions. So she went for getting a training as a lawyer, and then eventually got into politics. And ultimately, she was also well known for education. I think she was the Minister of Education or something like that. And if you look at her horoscope, let me see. Also, this is what I was going to say. From the moon perspective, Saturn aspects, let me see, the 5th house. Saturn aspects the 5th house, which is the 5th house is also the house of education. It's the house of children. To some extent, it's also the house of, dealing with, to some extent, also maybe dealing with an audience, but not so much, okay? I would say mainly it is a house of education. And she was known for that. And also it's, of course, a house of politics. And because it's the natural house that is connected to Leo. And aside from that, what I was going to say is, if you look at her, and also from the moon, let me see, you have Saturn, Mercury is ruling the 2nd house, the 11th house, and Saturn is ruling the 6th house and the 7th houses. So if you look at it from the moon, all of these areas translate into she is working with her voice. So she was known for her communication skills, her voice, her family background. She was known for dealing with wide audiences. You have the 11th house. Also shows gains from using the voice, gains from her willpower. Through her own willpower, she will gain a lot of things. Also shows dealing with an audience, the 7th house. So she has multiple houses that have to deal with audience, with the public. Also, the 7th house is another house that is connected to the legal profession and counseling. Okay, so you see this from the moon already, but if you look at it from the ascendant perspective, the ascendant of the D1 chart, she has Mercury ruling the 12th house, the 8th house, the 9th house, and Saturn rules the 4th house and the 5th house. So she has all of the education houses represented by Mercury, which is conjunct Saturn. So, and throughout her career, she was well known for being in good connections. Of course, by virtue of her position, she had to be in good connections. But she actually did maintain good connections with foreigners, especially the president of the US, I think, at the time. And she was also a minister of education. And all of the education houses are connected to her Saturn. So you have the 12th house, the 9th house, which the 12th house shows faraway places. 9th house is also foreign lands, faraway places, but it's also an education house. 4th house and 5th houses are also education houses. So all of the things that she was by and large known for are basically shown by the houses and her Saturn situation here. Whether you look at it from her Lagna or her Chandra Lagna. And also, of course, Saturn being in the 1st house shows that her entire life, the main thing was working on herself, perfecting herself. Which, when you think about it, turned out to be true, yes. Her main job was to, keep perfecting herself, keep also pushing herself forward, because the 1st house is the house of assertiveness. And it's also about becoming a public figure, being center stage. That can also have to do with the 1st house being connected to the 5th house. So, in any case, this was Margaret Thatcher, but let me see. There's more. Let me look at Carl Jung. Okay, this is also very interesting. So in his horoscope, he has moon is in a higher degree than the ascendant. So the ascendant would take slightly higher priority when it comes to predicting his life path. And he has Saturn in the 2nd house from the ascendant, in Dhanishta Nakshatra, aspecting the 4th house and his moon. And the moon is in Bharani Nakshatra. Now, first of all, you might think, okay, the 2nd house doesn't really connect to therapy initially when you think about it. But the 2nd house is the house of family of origin, first and foremost. And the 2nd house is also about the voice, using your speech, your communication, but especially the voice. And in his case, being a psychotherapist, it was all about analyzing the family lineages, right? Because a lot of therapy is about, working with people on what their childhood trauma was, what is their family background. Also, Saturn is aspecting moon in Bharani in the 4th house. So the 4th house, again, is the house of family and the mother and the mother's lineage. And moon in Bharani, again, is a very strong placement for someone who seeks to uncover what is hidden, especially things that are even borderline mystical, including things like astrology. And Jung actually had a fallout with Freud because he was much more accepting of astrology and Freud thought that he was crazy. And and Bharani, Edgar Cayce also had moon in Bharani and he was a psychic, like legit psychic. And yeah, so Bharani is a nakshatra, like I also talked about this in the Venus ruled nakshatra video, that has to do with very feminine energy, by the way, but it's also about All kinds of like potentially dark subjects. Also, Bharani is connected to issues of incest. It's connected to morality. It's connected to digging into, again, the past, digging into the subconscious. And that's another thing. The subconscious already is shown here because the fourth house is the house of the subconscious. It's the house that is the darkest, quote unquote, because it's literally the opposite of, you know, the 10th house, which is where the sun is in its highest strength. So the fourth house is basically the night when everything is dark, and it's like, so the fourth house is about what is hidden from view. It is about the subconscious. It's about the personal subconscious and the connection to the mother. Whereas the 12th house, I would say, is more about the more connected to things like, you know, picking up energies from the environment, and it's more about the collective subconscious, if you will. Both of them, actually all three water houses, so the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th house, are somehow connected to the subconscious. But out of these, the 4th is definitely the one that speaks more to the personal experience of the individual, because it's, again, linked to early childhood, you know, childhood traumas and all that stuff. So in his case, he has Saturn in the 2nd house, aspecting the 4th house, and aspecting Moon in Bharani. Moon is about the mind. It's also, he worked his entire life, right, to understand the mind, how the mind works, to understand people's personalities. That's another one. The moon is the strongest signifier of what a person's basic personality is in Vedic astrology, according to Vedic astrology, right? So you have like really strong indicators here. And let me see some other stuff. You also have Mars aspecting Saturn, which is really interesting. And Mars is sitting in the 11th house in Scorpio, okay? Which Scorpio is probably the sign that is most connected to psychotherapy. And it's in Jyeshta, which is the nakshatra that is most connected to being self-made. You know, reaching a level of authority through your own efforts. So yes, and then he also has Saturn aspected by Jupiter in the 10th house. Jupiter in the 10th house, can I just say, that's a great placement for any kind of counselor, consultant, anything like that, right? Someone who's kind of like an advisor, a guide, a teacher. But Jupiter also aspects Saturn in Aquarius, and it's, I think, in Swati Nakshatra. No, it's in Chitra Nakshatra. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so he definitely also, but in any case, what I was gonna say is that Saturn gets a boost from Mars and Jupiter here. Jupiter, which stands for higher education, you know, philosophy, learning, understanding, teaching. Mars, which gives a strength, a boost of willpower, right? Mars is seeking to conquer, quote, the 2nd house and Saturn, right? So, and also Saturn as the basic signifier of a career, and having Jupiter in the 10th house, you can definitely get the message that he was also very interested in just building a name for himself, which, you know, nothing wrong with that. And he sought to do that through his best abilities, his natural abilities. And again, okay, so this was what I can say about Jung, and let me see. Also, let's look at Sigmund Freud. In his case, you have, okay, the ascendant is in a slightly lower degree than the moon, but I would look at it from both perspectives here. So, first of all, let me see. Already, from the ascendant, Saturn is sitting in the 9th house, the house of higher education, also foreign cultures. Saturn is in 5 degrees Gemini, which puts it in Mrigashira Nakshatra, which is a nakshatra connected to investigations, analytical skills, getting to the bottom of things. So already, again, doesn't necessarily point to a career in, how should I put it, psychotherapy, but it's something, it does show that his life's work is somehow connected to signifiers of Mrigashira, right? Like being investigative, being analytical, being also very focused on education and teaching, right? So he has Saturn there. Let me see what aspects are going on. Not any strong aspects when you look at it from the ascendant. So Saturn in the 9th house just showed that his entire life he was a student, right? He was constantly seeking to, get a lot of information, a lot of education. But also Saturn is aspecting the 11th house by third aspect. So 11th house is the house that is connected to fame, notoriety, recognition by an audience, by large groups of people. So clearly he was also to some extent focused on making a name for himself. Third. Also Saturn aspects Jupiter by 10th aspect, which actually shows Jupiter is going to be instrumental in giving him his status in society. And Jupiter is in 7 degrees Pisces. Let me check. Uttara Bhadrapada. Okay, interesting. So Uttara Bhadrapada also is, Pisces again has to do with the subconscious. But Uttara Bhadrapada is actually a nakshatra that is very connected to, work in psychology, work in understanding the conscious, the subconscious, also nowadays it is connected also to things like astrology, mysticism, yoga, stuff like that. But okay, so this is from the ascendant, but let's look at it from the moon sign. Again, from the moon sign, Saturn is falling in the 2nd house, which again is the house of the family and aspects, the 4th house. Similarly to Carl Jung's chart. On top of that, let me see. Saturn rules the 9th and 10th houses from the moon. So again, clearly this shows that he was working his entire life for getting education. So the 9th house is important from both the Chandra Lagna and the Lagna. And then building a career for himself, building a stable name and a career for himself. But from the ascendant, again, from the ascendant as well, you see that Saturn is ruling the 4th and the 5th houses, which again has to do with education and family life and kids and also the subconscious. But I would say the main signifier in his case is the fact that he has Saturn in Mrigashira, which points to some investigative profession, investigative preoccupation, okay? Maybe not necessarily, this is an example where it's not necessarily like showing Saturn by itself, it's not showing like the career exactly, but it is showing areas of interest and areas that he has worked on throughout his entire life. Okay, moving on to, let me see, another example, Vivien Leigh. So this is interesting again, because here in her case, moon is in a lower degree than the ascendant. And you see that moon is in Shravana in Capricorn, okay, yeah. But it's really important to look here that when you look at it from the ascendant, you have Saturn in the 2nd house, which in of itself does not necessarily show, let's say, acting career, right? 2nd house, again, could have also shown a career in therapy, or just shows working with family, right? 2nd house is about the family of origin. It also just shows that the voice, using the voice, is something that is going to be an area you work on. And again, it is quite relevant when you think about the fact that the role that she was most known for, which is Scarlett O'Hara, she got praise for because she was so good at mastering the Southern accent, even though she was English. So to some extent, and also as far as I've seen some documentaries about her, you know, she was very hardworking when it came to learning her lines and learning accents, and so these things do kind of point to second house preoccupation, learning how to use your voice, not just her accents, but also how she spoke, like her pitch and all this stuff, like which generally is important for actors a lot, right? They do like all kinds of trainings to. Also, Marilyn Monroe was also an example who, I don't know, I didn't check her chart with respect to Saturn, but they have these vocal coaches that teach them how to speak for different roles, higher pitch, lower pitch, etc. So, and I've actually, seen some documentary that suggested she was very focused on this area of getting her voice right for the role, her accent right, and all this stuff. And of course, her speech was very important because she was working as an actress. And also, Mercury is opposite Saturn. So Saturn and Mercury have a mutual aspect, as it is called in Vedic astrology. It's not so much called an opposition as it is called a mutual aspect. And Mercury is ruling the third house, which further emphasized the use of communication is important for her life's work or her social karma. And Mercury also rules the sixth house from her ascendant, which shows basically her everyday tasks, her everyday routines are somehow connected to this situation, right? And yeah, so she was definitely very diligent. But also when you look at it from the moon, and which is actually a little bit more important in her case because the moon is in a lower degree, Saturn is falling in the fifth house, which makes it even more important in determining the fact that she has spent her entire life perfecting creative expression. The fifth house is the house of creative expression. That's the main thing it is. So, and dramatic arts, of course. It's the house that corresponds to the sign of Leo. And also, again, it's opposite Mercury, which now falls in the 11th house from the moon, which shows gains as well. So it also shows that the gains, in her case, are coming from her communication skills. And also, unrelated to Saturn, you can also see that Sun is in the 10th house from the moon. So just to give you a little, a more of a nudge in the direction of Chandra Lagna is interesting to look at. Having Sun in the 10th from the moon clearly shows that somehow, dramatic arts, dramatic creative expression is relevant in her achieving the highest social status possible. But in her situation, just looking at the Saturn again gives you a pretty strong idea about what she has spent most of her efforts on throughout her lifetime. And she was definitely also an example of a person who knew from a very young age that she wanted to be an actor, Okay, moving on to Elizabeth Taylor. Let me see. Saturn in the third house. Again, Saturn in the third house about communication. So communication is already something of an area, not just communication, but Saturn in the third house is also showing very strong willpower. Again, something she was known for throughout her life. She was definitely known to be very feisty and very much adamant to get exactly what she wanted when she wanted. And she was just also generally admired for, her willpower, for having a lot of determination. I think I remember again seeing something about how she started out in acting, and she was, even though she was kind of pushed also by her family, but she also herself was very ambitious, and she subjected herself to all kinds of like trainings and stuff to make herself appropriate for her first roles. So showing a kind of determination that was unusual for a child because she was an actor since childhood. So, and also Saturn from the third aspect, again, the fifth house. So by third aspect. So the area that she puts conscious effort into is the fifth house, which again, like in Vivien Leigh's case, is a house of dramatic arts, creative expression. And on top of that, in her case, Saturn aspects Rahu and Venus. Venus being, again, a planet connected to arts, artistic expression. You know, in her case also marriage, and I talked about this more. I actually did a, video on her that is all about her astrological profile. I'm going to link that in the description, where I talked more in depth about all the different areas of her life. Okay, so yeah, but pretty much it also, let me check this. Yeah, also Saturn is in Uttara Ashadha, which is a nakshatra that is connected to, it is ruled by the sun. So again, the sun becomes important to understand how Rahu is going to manifest its energy. And the sun also is the planet of dramatic arts, and is conjunct Mars and Mercury, showing even stronger determination towards this area in her horoscope. Yeah, so this is pretty much what I can say. And again, I'm looking at it mainly from her ascendant, because the ascendant is in a lower degree. If you look at it from the moon, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, from the moon, actually, from the moon, Saturn falls in the fourth house, which is interesting. So this would mean that her mother was quite important in, crafting her career and her social status, which is true. And Saturn is also, yes, I should have mentioned this, Saturn is opposite Jupiter as well, which gives her a kind of luck boost. And Jupiter is in the ninth house, which would show, how should I put it, being known in foreign cultures as well. And also Jupiter rules the second house, and again the fifth house from the ascendant, and it aspects Saturn. Also I think Jupiter gives her that boost of luck, to get things. But yes, from the moon, Saturn is in the fourth house, aspecting Jupiter in the 10th house. Again, pretty significant as well, because Jupiter in the 10th, again, would show luck in career. So yes, this is pretty much what I can say about her charts. Let me see. Now I also wanted to look at the charts of two of my favorite current singers. One of them is Harry Styles. And let's look at his chart. Now, granted, Harry Styles is pretty young, but again, this is a person who already has become pretty known for his profession, so I think it's interesting to look at. And Saturn is, again, you see from his ascendant, and in his case, again, the ascendant is in a lower degree than the moon, so the ascendant would be more important in reading his overall, let's say, not necessarily life path, but when it comes to career trajectory, it's more important to look from his ascendant perspective. Wow, like every ambulance in the world is like running right now, and like I swear it has been peace and quiet all day, and as soon as I started recording, it's like noise after noise. But anyway, I refuse to get annoyed by it. So yes, Saturn is in the fifth house. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, Saturn is in the fifth house, and it's also in Dhanishta, I think. Is it in Dhanishta or not? Let me check again. Yes, it's in Dhanishta, and Mercury is in Dhanishta as well. So, and Dhanishta is a nakshatra that, again, is about fame, mass fame. I talked about this nakshatra in the Mars dominant nakshatras video that I did. I'm going to be linking all the relevant videos, hopefully, in the video description. Hopefully, I won't miss out any of them, But yes, so he has this conjunction in Dhanishta, which is connected to arts, music, dancing, performing arts of all kinds. And then on top of that, it's in the fifth house, which is the house of performing arts, right? Also, I think he also is an actor now, or for a while. I haven't actually analyzed his entire life story, but I do know he's, I like his music. He's very popular, has millions of views, whatever. He's also very well known abroad from his country and all this stuff. So what I see is, okay, so he already has this Saturn Mercury, clearly shows a lot of focus on arts, music, performing arts. And since Saturn is conjunct Mercury, this is because normally Saturn in the 5th house is actually a pretty sad placement. But in his case, Saturn is actually strong because it is in its own sign in Aquarius. And then it's also conjunct Mercury, one of its friends, which makes Saturn more fun, more expressive, more, open and extroverted. Normally Saturn in the 5th would tend to show a person that's quite shy most of the times. Yeah, and then on top of that, he also has Jupiter in the Ascendant, okay. And Mercury in his case, let me see, not just that, but Saturn rules the 4th house, Saturn rules the 5th house. So Saturn rules the 5th and it's sitting in the 5th. So clearly performing arts, music, not so much music actually, just by looking at the placements I mentioned so far, but performing arts, definitely, being there, center stage, being seen by loads of people, it's definitely here. The themes are here. And on top of that, it's aspected by Jupiter. Jupiter is in the Ascendant, aspecting Saturn, which Saturn in the 5th, which gives a boost of luck and a boost with respect to gaining fame, gaining opportunities with respect to creative expression and fame and everything connected to the 5th house. And Mercury rules the 9th house and the 12th house, like I mentioned, okay? So Mercury is giving him this overseas notoriety, international notoriety, right? Because it rules the 12th houses and the 9th houses, basically covering the entire world scene, right? Because 9th house, foreign places, 12th house, most foreign places that are like as far away from you as it gets, sorry. And let me see, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? By 10th aspect also aspects the 2nd house, which is important because it's the house of the voice. And furthermore, and it's also the house where Rahu is sitting. So clearly Rahu in the 2nd house, yeah, focus on the voice among many other things, but I won't get into his entire horoscope now. Another thing that I wanted to say is that Jupiter also rules the 3rd house, which is the house that is, again, the 3rd house and the 2nd houses are the most important when it comes to seeing a musical profession, because these are the 2 houses that have to do with the voice and the communication skill. And you have Jupiter, the ruler of the 3rd house, and also the ruler of the 6th house, aspecting Saturn. So, and the 6th house being the house of daily routines, what you do on a regular basis, what most of your repetitive routines are about. So all of these are somehow connected to Saturn, which shows that a lot of his efforts are towards willpower, using of the voice, discipline, determination, creative expression, dancing, and music. So I would say pretty relevant. Moving on to my second, one of my most favorite contemporary artists, Taylor Swift. Similar vibes here. So you have already from the beginning, what stands out is Saturn is in the 2nd house, again conjunct Mercury, just as in Harry Styles' horoscope, and Saturn is ruling the 3rd and the 4th houses. So in her case, it's actually really even more important that she has Saturn in the 2nd house, because as far as I've read, her whole family is basically involved in her career somehow, similarly to Britney Spears. So let's hope that it all turns out well. But as far as I've read, yeah, I think her father and her mother are connected to her profession. So Saturn in the 2nd house also can show that family affairs are going to be a lifelong theme. But in her case, also the 2nd house, of course, for a musician is very important because the 2nd house is the voice. And she has also Saturn ruling the third house. So both of the musical houses are maximally activated. And then Saturn is also connected to Mercury, which is really important for someone who writes lyrics. Because, well, Mercury is about the communication, it's about composition. And also it's opposite Jupiter, the second most important planet when it comes to composing things like lyrics or writing novels or stuff like that. And also it's opposite the moon, which is imagination, creativity. And again, in her case, she is a person that knew from a very young age that she wanted to be a musician, you know? So clearly I can see where that is coming from looking at her chart. And in her case, the moon is at a higher degree than the ascendant, so the ascendant takes precedence. But even if you look at it from the moon, you have Saturn in the 7th house, which is interesting because the 7th house shows audiences, basically. It shows the masses, it shows others. So being known through your connection to other people, connecting with other people easily. Addressing an audience, that kind of thing. But also going back to her ascendant, Mercury rules the 8th and let me see, the 8th and the 11th houses. Interesting. Which both massive gains. Okay, so I mean, clearly this shows an area where she is going to be very successful. All of the activities connected to Saturn are going to bring her success. So 11th house, yes, the house of gains from the career. And also, again, a house that shows wide audiences. Right? Both the 7 and the 11th houses are connected to large groups of people, addressing an audience. And this is how she became famous. So I think it's really telling. And in her case, you can see the precociousness because she just has so many planets connected to this situation. So, she has, like I said, Mercury, Saturn, and Jupiter and Moon influencing her second house. So it definitely shows that, this is a person who's very imaginative, very creative. And on top of that, Moon and Jupiter are in Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury. So you can definitely, if I would have seen this chart, let's say, and I didn't know who she was, I would have definitely also said that this is someone who might become a writer, for instance. Maybe not necessarily a composer, although if I would have taken a closer look, I might also have mentioned composer. Yeah, and on top of that, she also has, unrelated somewhat, she has Venus-Rahu conjunct in Capricorn in the 3rd house, which again, one of the houses of music. She also plays instruments, as far as I know. Yeah, so definitely you can see all of these interests coming together in her chart. And granted, she is, like Harry Styles, really young. So it's kind of like weird to say it's their life's work. But already up until their lives so far, you can clearly see that, it's showing their life's work. Okay, so these are pretty much the examples that I have for you, and I hope you have found this useful as usual. And if you have, do not forget to like and subscribe and hit the notifications bell if you want to see another video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. Please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you.